Welcome to Sober.Coffee, a weekly coffee chat sharing experience, strength, and hope for anyone on the sober road to recovery. You can download Sober.Coffee weekly on all podcast platforms and check us out on Instagram at Sober.Coffee Podcast and on Twitter at Sober.Coffee Pod. To learn more about us and to help support these sessions, visit online at Sober.Coffee. Here are your hosts, two guys on their own path of recovery, Mike and Glenn. Let's join them at the coffee shop.
Technically speaking, we got three guys on their own path to recovery today.
I love that.
I know, right?
Special table for three, huh?
So we got a guest, but we got some housekeeping that we got to do first.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, right. So,
well, the first thing I need to do for housekeeping, I need
ahead.
to get a new podcast file.
Pardon me?
I need to get a new podcast file because the one I showed you this morning, the one I've got coffee stains on it. Yeah. It's all like crimpled and crumpled and whatever the word is. And
but you know, you want
I need to get a new one.
You want your go-tos to be a little weathered, right? So, like for example, I don't know, the AA Big Book. You want that to, you want underline. You want it to be a little messy with coffee stains. You don't want it pristine. What does that say about yourself?
I was always jealous of the big books that were like really worn.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, I wonder how they get that way.
I think you buy them that way. It's like, can I have one that looks new, or can I just have one that looks like really used? And
I think that's awesome. Hey, you know what's funny is, I'm looking forward to chatting with our guests this morning. But I was actually at a meeting last night. You know, this guy comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, man, are you Glenn from that podcast?" I'm like, well, it depends on which podcast you're talking about.
Yeah, Joe Rogan.
Yeah, totally,
Yeah,
man.
right.
But it's a small world.
Yeah,
It's
hey,
great.
listen, want to do a quick shout out to Brian, our production engineer here. He makes us look good. The funny thing is, right now we're just in audio, but after the flip
It's
of
coming.
the year,
It's
after
coming.
the flip of the year, we'll add some video elements, and
Yeah, but that's
Brian keeps us looking good.
technically, when you say beginning of the year, that's we need to date this stuff. So it's January of 2023.
Right,
We're
right.
going to YouTube, but you won't see YouTube right away.
Right.
You'll see that sometime, probably April.
Gosh, you know, it was easier to quit drinking than to understand what you're talking about right now.
Totally.
Sure, it's
'cause,
like blurring
dude,
me
this
out
is
there.
complicated stuff. This
Yeah.
scheduling stuff.
So listen, I'm giddy today. Giddy.
Again?
Yeah.
You're always giddy.
Yeah. So one of our listeners reached out and he's joining us this morning from live from London.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, right. And he does the coolest thing in the world. And I say I'm giddy because giddy is what I was when I was a kid, right? And
Excitement.
yeah, you're eating sugary cereal, you're watching cartoons, you know, it's just it just was a good simple time, you know. There's something about cartoons and animation that just kind of works for me. Does it work for you? Do you watch like all the new Disney stuff? And
I do not watch cartoons today. There was a point in time I just became too busy. But I grew up on cartoons. I grew up on animation, graphics, and I mean, I was a Saturday morning cartoon freak.
yeah, right.
Just like
right?
you. Yeah,
I know.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, it's funny when you mentioned Quint's from London. I looked at a map the other day of where our listeners come from. I mean, how do people from Mumbai and
Well, we're big in Mumbai.
Bangalore and I mean, how in the world do they find us?
I don't know.
It's crazy.
I don't know.
But we're out there.
I try and hide from you. I can't hide. So.
But I think we get 5 or 8% of our listeners from the UK, from
right.
London area. That's
awesome.
large.
So live from London, we have Quint with us this morning.
Welcome,
Quint,
Quint.
welcome.
Good morning. Welcome, guys. Welcome, guys. Lovely to see you.
Yeah.
But I know we're in audio, but I mean, you look fantastic. The pair of you are beautifully lit. Thank you, Brian. Yeah. And you got a lovely banner there behind you, wearing your merch, which is fantastic. You're so together.
We're feeling it, you know. So
Yeah.
We're feeling it. So Quint, we're going to get to the meat of it a little bit later on because you're doing some really, really, really cool things that I've checked out and I love. But why don't you start out? Tell us a little bit about Quint here at the coffee shop. Tell us a little bit. Give us a little background on because I think it's going to blend in how you ended up where you ended up. You know, it's exciting.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, hopefully I can live up to your expectations. So my name's Quint Bower. I'm the my father was Bruce Bower, who was an American actor or Canadian actor who came over here in the early 70s. And he was the American who was in Fawlty Towers, who wanted a Waldorf salad, and apples, celery, walnuts, grapes was the key phrase. He also worked on Empire Strikes Back and Full Metal Jacket and a host of other films and television programs and TV commercials in the 70s and 80s.
Just so you know, Quint, I was in none of those.
Yeah. So he came over in the early 60s, and he was an alcoholic, and he met my mother, and they had me in 1962. And we muddled along. But my brother was born 2 years after me, and for the first 7 years, Bruce was a raging alcoholic. So he managed to stay sober for individual jobs. So if he had for example, a TV commercial for Samurai cigarettes, he only had to stay sober for 2 days. 1 day to fly out to the ski resort to shoot it, 1 day to shoot it, and then he could get drunk on the plane coming back.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. Only he couldn't ski, right? So there's another story there. But yes, he was a full-on raging alcoholic, and by virtue of the fact he was in the film game, he would earn a lot of money very, very quickly, and that enabled him to keep the house afloat financially, but also allowed him a lot of time to drink. He never had to really compromise his drinking. He wasn't a working Joe. He'd only work, a dozen days a year, but he'd make enough money in that time. Then there was voiceovers as well, so he'd do a few voiceovers, and he'd get by. He got sober when I was 7, and then I grew up from 7 to about 15, 16 when I started to drink. And my first experience of drinking was, this is all right, but it's not great. And then gradually ease into it, and suddenly it just made me feel alive. And all of the sort of the anxieties and the concerns that I had would just be magically sort of misted away through a haze of ESB beer, Guinness, and wine. And that started the pattern for the next, I guess, 40 odd years. Mm-hmm. So I started drinking. I got involved in doing film extra work. I worked on all sorts of films in the early 80s. Then in the late 80s, I got involved in the other side, involved in camera work and that. At the same time, I started getting involved in psychotherapy and psychology. So I started doing a degree in psychology, which ended up being an MA. And then I got full UKCP qualification to be a shrink myself. The whole time, of course, I was drinking. And my sort of standard tipple was to do a couple of bottles of wine a day and maybe a couple of beers. And that kept me going. So I can't really sort of articulate the twin tracks here. Should we do drink first, and then I'll do the career? So We'll do the drink first. So I was drinking 2 bottles of wine and a bottle of beer till probably about the age of sort of early 40s, and then started to sort of, I needed more of a pick me up earlier. Started to drink more, and basically things started to unravel fairly quickly by then, because I had a wife and 2 kids. The business that I'd started, which we'll go into later, was starting to become quite a concern, quite a large organization. We were starting to open up and getting some big clients, and I realized that actually, if I continued to drink, that things were going to come unstuck. And so I guess I sort of carouseled around for a period of about 5 or 6 years, trying to stop drinking and realizing, well, in fact, not really, trying to stop drinking, and then finding myself unable to. So all the bargaining, I'll stay off for 4 days. I'll only drink this much. I'll only drink between this hour and this hour. It just didn't work,
Right.
It's just, it's, and it felt unique to me. That's the thing. I thought, I can outthink this. I can outdo this. It felt unique to me. And sure as eggs is eggs, I couldn't. I bounced in and out of AA because I went to AA and people in AA were talking about how they flipped the car, how they lost their jobs, how they manhandled their wives. And I did none of that. I was quite a fun drunk, really. I mean, by my own lights, I was a bit of a laugh. I was always
in your mind.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, in my...
We'll have your wife on next week and ask if she was laughing.
Absolutely.
That's great.
But the other thing to this was that because my father had gone into AA, I didn't want to be like my father, and I didn't want to admit that because I had a very difficult relationship with him, and I didn't want to admit that I had the same thing as he did. And if I went into an AA meeting in this area, which the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. I mean, he lived. We passed away now years ago, but he lived in Richmond. I live in Kingston. I mean, there's not too many AA meetings in this area. And any AA meeting, actually still that I go into, when they hear the name Boa, they go, "Oh, you're Bruce's son, right?" And it's either, over here we have an expression, it's a Marmite character. So Marmite's a spread that we have here made out of yeast. And you either love it or you hate it. Mm-hmm. So we say he was a Marmite person. You either loved him or you hate him. Some people come up and go, oh, he saved my life. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here today. And I'm forced to go, well, that's great. I'm really happy for you because he was a shit dad.
Right. No, I totally get that. Yeah.
Other people come up and go, you know what? He was an asshole, your father. He'd stand up in the front of the meeting and he'd think he was in a pulpit and he'd be talking for all of us and he'd be telling us all how to get sober and stay sober. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when that happens in an AA meeting, I'm like, shut up.
Right.
You can't. Stop talking for everybody here. Stop telling us how to interpret the big book. Don't do that. This is an individual journey. And so I didn't want to get into AA because of that. And also because a lot of it, there's a couple of meetings around here were very God-bothery. It was God, as in the traditional omniscient, omnipotent man in the sky. But I found a couple of meetings are much more humanistic. So God, as an acronym, was the great outdoors, or a group of drunks, or a generally orderly direction, which is much more my cup of since I'm here, not tea, cup of coffee. And I immediately when I found this little group, if anybody's in London, it's in Richmond. It's underneath the bridge. There's a 300-year-old bridge that spans the River Thames, and underneath that bridge is the meeting. And so you're underneath the arches, so it's exposed brickwork and an arch. So you just light a couple of candles, you can hear the ducks outside, the sun's up in the right direction, the light of the sun is playing on the water, which is playing on the ceiling of the exposed bricks.
That's nice.
It's heavenly. It's fantastic.
Right.
And you just read the big book and everyone's sharing, and it's a lovely way to start the morning.
Right, that's awesome.
And I found my tribe in there, and that was the start of it. And I found a sponsor, and that was about 8.5 years ago. And I'm a happy customer. What can I say? My life has absolutely changed.
Yeah.
In ways that I couldn't have imagined, really.
Right.
Shall I go back to the business side of things?
Yeah, we'll jump there in a second. There's a couple things you said to me, and I'm sure I see Glenn jotting down some notes too, but he'll probably spill coffee on him later. But I love how you said it, and it really resonated with me. And that was, it felt unique to me. Both my disease, both the chaos felt unique to me. And then you segued over and you didn't say it again, but I said it again in my head. Recovery is unique to an individual, right? Yeah. So you've got that whole kind of prism that we are walking a unique road to ourselves. Yeah. And so maybe some things that somebody say make sense and you connect, and other, it's like you said, that's not really me. I didn't do all that, but it's unique to me. I lived my own hell, if you will, and I'm surviving in my own heaven.
Yeah. Well, I've been lucky enough to go around the world, going to different AA meetings, and whether it's in Dubai or Amsterdam or New York, you could take a transcript from anybody who's sharing at those meetings and read it, and you identify with it. Mm-hmm. I could have written any one of those things that have been said because the themes are recurring. Mm-hmm. Isn't it strange how unique it does feel to you, but actually those themes are stereotypical for every one of us.
Right.
It's an extraordinary thing.
Right, sure.
It feels so particular and subjectively right for me.
Right.
But when other people when they share, it's like, God, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. It chimes with me, what they're saying. Yeah. And I think that's the massive power of when we go back to group of drunks, mm-hmm. that's it. It's that shared experience. Even though we all feel it was subjective to us, it resonates in one another, and it builds this quorum of support that is so great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple things. One is it was really evident to start that for a lot of us, not necessarily my story, but for many stories that we hear, it starts early. It starts with the family, right? It starts with the influence of mom and dad and the impact that their experience, with drinking or alcoholism, has on us.
Sometimes without.
Right. And then, one thing I really resonated with was when you're talking about, how life was compromising your drinking, right? That there was a point in time where you started drinking became everything, right? Yeah. You started doing it earlier, and then you're also explaining about your dad and kind of his experience with drinking and working, and I really related to that because there were times that I fit my life into my drinking schedule and how it did or didn't fit into my drinking. Yeah.
I mean, towards the end, I was because I had an expense account. I was getting employees to come to the pub with me at opening hours, just to have just for an excuse for them to be there. Yeah,
I totally did that.
Just to enable me, Oh, come on, Joe, come over to the pub. Let's talk about this project. It's 11 o'clock. Yeah, but it's a celebration. You've been doing so well for the last 3 months. I thought you needed it. Did it bollocks to that. I needed it. Because I couldn't get to 12 o'clock. The fear was descending on me, and I needed a monkey lifter to get me out of it.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's funny. All right, so let's go back and thread some of. So as you were moving along, you were advancing in business, and I think I can say with confidence that you were kind of following some of the inherent gifts you had, and so talk a little bit about your business experience that brought you up to where you're at now.
Yeah. Well, really, it's a fairy story, really, because what happened was I was working as a cameraman on a program called Top of the Pops, which I'm not sure how many of you will know what that is, but it's a music show. There was a very big music show over here, and I was working as a cameraman on that. And in the year 2000, it became possible for computers to ingest video and to edit it. And so I thought, well, hang on a sec. What we can do here is we can actually become a production company. And so what I started doing was producing videos for field marketing companies. So a field marketing company will get a group of guys and girls to go out with little sachets of yogurt or coffee or something and hand it out at a station. Sure. And we'd film that. And when we'd put some metrics over it, 50 people handed out 2,000 bottles of Actimel yogurt, for example, and then the field marketing company would give that to the PR company, who'd give that to the client, and it went down a storm. This is all on VHS, which you're both too young to remember, but it's kind of a tape.
I'm there, VHS, or Super 8, Sony Beta.
Mike was around for reel to reel, so.
Right. Anyway, so we did that. So the field marketing company gave it to the PR company. Anyway, they all said, where the hell did you get this? it was us. So we then got into the PR companies. We then got into the clients themselves. So, for example, we got into Procter & Gamble, and we got into various construction companies. We got into little healthcare companies. And we were working with an American bank called Bear Stearns, which was then the financial crash happened. JP Morgan gobbled up Bear Stearns. And we were very fortunate to go into the belly of the beast at JP Morgan. Mm-hmm. So suddenly we're working inside JP Morgan. Wow. That was a terrific relationship and continues to the present day. So we continue. So basically, we got an office and we employed more men and women. We got it to a group of about 10 or 12. Mm-hmm. And in 2012, 2014, animation started to become viable for people to produce themselves. Well, for a small company to produce it. Right. The version of After Effects, the latest version of After Effects, was really quick and really easy to use, mm-hmm. and computers were fast enough to actually render the images out. Mm-hmm. So we started to offer animation. Well, I mean, companies who we were talking to were all about animation because they were either doing high products that were complex products that were too big to describe using video, complex that were too small to describe using video, like healthcare. Mm-hmm. And so there was an immediate demand for animation, and that demand has grown and grown and grown to the present day. Wow. And then other things that happened was we had this thing called Brexit happen to us in the UK, which was god awful for us because about a third of our book was coming from Europe. Mm. So we were producing videos on how great it was to be in the EU. Mm-hmm. And then we got kicked out of we left the EU, and the EU said to us, well, you can't do videos about that anymore. Goodbye. Yeah, right. Or au revoir. So we had to set up in Amsterdam, which we are to the present day. Okay. And then we also set up in New York, and then we set up in Los Angeles because our clients were saying, well, look, you're doing it for us in England, but we really need this in the States. So that's what we did.
That's
so
awesome. Now,
so now we're a company of about 50 people in London, New York, Los Angeles, and Amsterdam, doing animation.
So that's great for the 50. Let's start talking about the 9 pieces that you introduced me to. Tell me how you segued into recovery type animation.
Okay, well, just after the pandemic, this teacher said to me about a fight that she'd had with a pupil in a classroom. The pupil had just gone ape at another pupil and hit him. And she said, this is just typical of post-COVID experiences in the classroom. And there's all this anger around. And I said, well, what about doing an animation on anger? Have you thought about that? No, what would that look like? So I did an animation on anger, but it wasn't tea and sympathy, how to control your anger. It was more in depth. Let's look at your anger. What could be underneath that anger? And using the metaphor of trees, the roots of the tree or what the depth of an iceberg. Produce this animation. And the way she deployed it was she sat down with the child and watched the animation. And then we also produced stills of the animation, which were wipeable, where he could write down, in this case, what that animation meant to him. Mm-hmm. Well, it was fantastic. Suddenly he felt heard. His reading age wasn't that great. This was a medium that he could actually engage with and relate to. And the animations are being used to the present day. The anger animation was the first of a series, and we did one on anxiety, which just blew up post-COVID. Everybody's anxious, right? I mean,
blew up in a good way, right?
Yeah. Sorry, yes, it went really well. Mm-hmm. Then we did one on trauma. Then we did one on depression. Then we did one on domestic violence. And what we did there was we put these all up onto the website to download free of charge, and we don't track the website, so we don't know who's on there. So it's totally anonymous. And they can download it and use it wherever they want. Then I set up an Instagram account about a year and a half ago, put them up there. And I think anxiety, I know, has been downloaded, 40,000 times or viewed 40,000 times. Addiction has been viewed 60,000 times.
The drug addiction one or alcohol?
Well, actually, alcohol is over drugs. I think it's because it's been up longer. Mm-hmm. But again, it doesn't. These animations they're not what I call tea and sympathy. It goes into it a bit about what alcohol is You know,
yeah, I loved it. I loved the visual. I loved the message behind it. And
thank you.
yeah, we're gonna put up. So there was 9 altogether. Is there more than 9 now, or there's 9 that I see posted on Understanding?
There's 9 at the moment, but what we're doing is we're waiting for feedback before we do some more, because it's been suggested that we do some on grief. Some people have asked us to develop some of the points made in the existing animations. The initiative we've got going at the moment is student support. So we're going into all the universities saying, well, in fact, they're coming to us as much, saying, can we use these animations to put up onto our student support and well-being to support students when they have anxiety or when they have depression, because they do.
That's awesome. So like the alcohol and the drug addiction one, though, there is no profit model for this.
No.
You just have them out there.
Well, this is the great thing about it, because sort of as I said earlier, the animation now has fallen to a price where it's relatively inexpensive to produce. It's within the budgets of schools and universities to produce these things for themselves, i.e. for us to produce it for them. Certainly, if 2 or 3 universities got together, they could do Lord of the Rings for $10,000.
Right.
You know, it just requires the narrative to work, and requires the thought to make it relatable and to address those issues in a relatable way, so that people can engage with it.
That's fantastic.
But this is an opportunity, because somehow animation does speak to people in a way that video doesn't seem to be able to.
Right.
And that accounts for it. Some of the greatest films in terms of mass entertainment have been animation, whether it's Finding Nemo or Shrek or Frozen or Toy Story, obviously, and these big franchises.
Right.
We can do that sort of thing.
That's good. So Quint, how do folks find you? I just pulled up Instagram, and I see that we're connected on Instagram, and you have a lot of followers, a lot of good content on Instagram. What are some ways that folks can find Quint?
Well, if you go to Instagram at Quint Boa, that's my so at Quint Boa, QUINTBOA. That's me.
Yep.
And then the same videos are on the Understanding page of the Shoot You website, which is probably a little bit difficult to find. But if anybody DMs me on Instagram, I can send a link to them.
Yeah, and we'll put it up on the website as well, but it's simply shootyou.com/understanding.
Shoot, Y-O-U.
Yeah, shoot, YOU. .com/understanding, and the 9 videos are up there. It's great stuff, Quint. I just think what I love about it is 2 things. First of all, I think you're meeting the market where they're at right now. You're addressing a concern in a entertaining and engaging way with real meat to it, and 3, you're not like trying to build the Quint B empire. You're just passing it on. I mean, you're doing 12-step work here, and again, I think that for me, alcohol, drug addiction, those were my first 2 watches. But then, hey, by the way, anxiety, anger, depression, domestic violence, has that affected me or my family? My extended family, yes. Trauma, absolutely. And I love the Our Nature piece. So I just think they're all really well done, and I would encourage people to go check them out.
That's so nice of you to say. It's so nice. Thank you very much indeed for that. I mean, we try. I mean, to your point earlier, the model that we're using is that was, say, for example, with anxiety, it all stems from childhood, I think. I mean, what do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to the extent that you're watchful as a child, it behooves you to be watchful as a child. I mean, for me, for example, being able to spot whether my father was drunk or not meant the difference between being hugged or being hit, and that sense of watchfulness
made you hyper aware.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Sure. And that level, that watchfulness becomes anxiety as you get older. It's very difficult to switch off. And nor should you try to switch it off. I mean, how are you going to get rid of that? I don't think you can, but you can change your relationship to it.
Right. Yep. And that's what I think the animations do. That's what
absolutely.
Well, they're bugging us for our table here, Quint. We'd love to have you back again, and absolutely would love people to go and download, check these things out. They're great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us at the coffee
thank
shop.
you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Quint. Great to meet you. I look forward to staying connected.
Yes, definitely. It's been a pleasure, guys. Thanks ever so much. Have a lovely day.
Have a bloody lovely day.
All right, Governor.
All right.
Goodbye.
See you. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for today's coffee chat. To contact the show, email us at podcast@Sober.Coffee. If you need immediate help, the AA hotline is 800-839-1686. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 800-273-8255. Remember, Mike and Glenn are sharing their own journey on the path to recovery. Any suggestions, medical or otherwise, are their own experiences and should not be viewed as professional advice. See you next week, and remember, there is a solution.